Split Tube Media and the Cinesthesia podcast present a special daily October podcast. Hell to the king.
Jason, have you read Stephen King's books? Have you read Stephen King's books? King movie, a Stephen King movie. King movie, a Stephen King movie. King movie, a Stephen King movie.
I have done my best to scare the shit out of you guys.
Welcome back to Hell to the King. I'm always so embarrassed when I listen back to those things that I do.
Are you?
I am.
I'm always impressed with your lack of self-consciousness, in general.
It's not a lack, it's just that I shut it down. Like, I have it, and I just push it to the side, and then it just comes flooding back as soon as I'm done.
Well, that's the thing I really admire about you, so don't feel bad about your
Thank you.
I wish I could do that. I can only do it if I'm alone in the house and no one's listening.
Well, that's sort of what it feels like. I'm just talking to you, right? Nobody else is going to hear this.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
We are back for the fifth night of
That
Hell
can't be true.
to the King. We're only on 5.
We've definitely done 18 of these.
We haven't even finished a week. It's going to be a long month.
Jason, I hope you know I've been only eating popcorn this whole time to keep myself in the movie mode.
A month of popcorn.
Yeah, and I think I might be jaundiced.
I think you might also never poop again.
Well, that's fine. Who needs to? Man, it's such a time waste.
You're not making microwave popcorn, are you? Because I hear they can give you popcorn lung.
No, I make it in a bucket. What? It gives me popcorn stomach. That's what I'm in it for, though.
Popcorn Lung, the latest 500-page book by Stephen King. Yeah. Speaking of 500-page books, we're gonna do a double episode today, and the first movie is The Dead Zone. I'm gonna redo everything I just said because that was terrible. I'm gonna cut that and say, where am I? Okay, here I am. We're here. What's happening? Alright, it's a double episode today, because we hate ourselves, and we have to get through 5,000 movies by the end of the month.
So today we watched Cujo 2 and Cujo 3.
It's true, Joe. No, today we are doubling up The Dead Zone, and Christine. And I wanted to double these up roughly for the same reason that we doubled up Carrie and The Shining in the first episode.
You knew they'd be good?
Well, yeah.
You want to crank through all the good ones?
I did feel like we will have less interesting things to say about the good ones because everybody's already seen the good ones. They know which ones. These are the classics. People know The Dead Zone. People know Christine. So I did want to make some more room for the weirder ones that maybe fewer people have seen or that just don't get as much attention and as much love. And we will probably regret that within a week from today. But
oh, for sure.
For now, we are back on top after the the cardboard scares of Cujo, the man in a big dog suit with toothpaste on his mouth. No, it was...
You know, if they played it as a man in a dog suit who was trying to murder those people instead of a dog, it would be a better movie.
Or even if they had just made it even more obviously a man in a dog suit in more shots. Yeah. Because that's actually part of the problem is they put other dogs in a dog suit, but they could have put a man in a dog suit for a lot more shots and it would have been a lot more entertaining.
Agreed.
But no, so we're back on top. We had a double dose of solid King adaptations from two great directors. And one of the other reasons I wanted to double this up is because I have a little little pet idea, pet thing right now. I don't know actually what I'm going to do with it, and I'm going to make you talk to me about it because okay. I'm not sure where it's going. But I have this notion of Cronenberg and Carpenter. It's David Cronenberg, director of The Dead Zone, and John Carpenter,
and Karen Carpenter,
director of
famous
Karen Carpenter. John Carpenter, director of Christine. Both of them directors also of many, many other movies. I have this idea of them as some sort of yin and yang, of some sort of opposed, complementary but opposed figures in 80s horror movies, but also in general in their overall artistic forces. But we don't have to get into that just yet. First, let's take these movies one by one. I'm very interested because last time I talked to you off air, you said you had some things to say about The Dead Zone, and I want to hear what they are.
I also just want to note that Carpenter and Cronenberg are also like a yin and yang in regards to where the hair is on their heads. I think it's important to know. Dead Zone feels to me... So we talked 8 years ago about your sort of coming into this theory about these books all being very internal, with sort of a thread plot that then a lot of what the movie is going to be is watching what the director hangs onto that like thin line that is the actual plot, because the internal stuff is difficult. And this movie, I think, is a super... I've been watching all of them with that kind of in mind, and this one feels like an incredible version of that. It also feels like a lot of these have felt so far like there's a lot of book, and they're like, well, I'm gonna have to lop it up a lot. But Cronenberg takes this movie at a clip, man. It's like 3 minutes into the movie, he's established this relationship and destroyed it. And I think it speaks to the strength of young parody of himself, Christopher Walken. And I don't actually know who the woman is who plays his fiancée at the beginning, but they're such a charming, beautiful couple for the 2 minutes that they get to be that. Mm-hmm. And then like within 15 minutes of the movie starting, Walken has gone through this tragedy and has been in a coma for 5 years and is awake and is a known psychic, right? 15 minutes into the movie.
Oh yeah, it wastes no time.
It's amazing. But it kind of makes sense also because it's clearly, there's two whole... Well, so the way I was watching it at first, and the way I kind of remember it from having seen it years ago, is that there are functionally two whole movies here, right? Where it's...
Oh, yeah.
There's the first half-ish is a movie about a series of murders that are happening that then Christopher Walken solves. In this, like, beautiful, painful moment where he psychically watches a murder happen, and then when he comes out of his psychic fit, he has this whole emotional panic because he feels like he was there and didn't do anything. He feels like he could have stopped it but didn't, which is, I don't know. It's such a lovely human being, his character.
Oh yeah, well, both those things are both very. Well, actually, I was gonna say it's both very King and very Cronenberg, but it's actually far more King than Cronenberg, because Cronenberg is not. When I think of Cronenberg, moral guilt is not a big idea in his universe.
His characters are generally unapologetically whoever they are, right? They don't have anything to prove.
Yeah.
But then, and then the second whole half is sort of this like political intrigue thing, and then in the last 15 minutes, he introduces the sort of final thrust where he's like, "Oh, I should kill this guy, but is it correct to kill this guy?" You know, and that like could be a whole movie.
Yeah.
but it's just the last 15 minutes, and it took me until the very end of the movie to realize that I think I was watching it. I think I was watching it thinking about it that way, but you can also think about it as a super traditional story structure where it's like, except I've forgotten what my traditional story structure is now. I figured it out for like an hour after I watched it. It's, he becomes a psychic, and then the whole second act is him. I don't know. I lost it. I'm sorry.
Well, so the second act is this whole other like search for a killer.
Well, yes. In my other read, I was lumping together. I was like, the second half of the first story and the first half of the second story makes sense as his sort of personal growth, because he moves on to another town and like moves past everything. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
I don't know what my lead was.
I think you're grasping towards something correct, which is it feels weirdly paced and structured, but that's only in comparison to how cliched and standardized Hollywood storytelling, right? Like, it is actually very traditional storytelling to have a character go through some sort of trauma and then move on to another venue and go through sort of a pseudo repetition of that trauma. It's like a variation on a theme, but then come out of it slightly differently and then move on to a last trauma, and where, you know, you come through it as completely changed, in this case, like dying a tragic hero's death. You know, like that's like classical almost, this sort of or operatic, maybe, like this continued variation on a theme. Like, we're going to do this one way, and then we're going to do the same thing another way, and then we're going to do the same thing a third way, and the differences are going to be where the meaning comes from. That's not really how Hollywood story structure works.
Yes. So there's a moment in this movie after he's alive again and his ex-fiancée is married with a child, where she comes over and they just hang out and then have sex for one night. Mm-hmm. And while it was happening, I was like, I hope her husband knows what she's doing. and then when they meet, the way that her husband treats Christopher Walken, I was like, oh, he definitely did. Yeah. He, like, definitely was totally. Like, it's okay, you have one night, go do this. Yeah, exactly. Which is really sweet, I think. Yeah, and I would believe, I have not, this is not one of the books I've read. It's a very long book, but I would believe that in The King telling, he does know, or like there's some recognition of that. But yeah, it's a weirdly, like you said, the pace of the movie is very quick in a certain way, but it has that Cronenberg coldness and deliberateness to it at the same time, which is very interesting. Yeah, it never feels like it's rushing. It covers a lot of ground very quickly, but it feels, if anything, it feels like it's sort of moving at a sedate pace. Yeah, and that's something Cronenberg movies often do, I feel like, is that when you actually go back and look at them, especially the early ones, but a lot of the different ones, story-wise, they move along at a steady clip. Like, he doesn't let things just linger. He's not one of those directors that just, like, holds on a scene for a long time or has nothing happening. He's moving on to the next idea, he's moving on to the next scene, he's moving on to the next, line of dialogue or action that means something to him. But within those scenes, everything is done at a fairly deliberate pace. It's not rushed through, it's not frenetic, and so you get this bifurcated sense of, things are moving quickly because the story is dense and continually moving along, but individual actions and tonal qualities and personalities are somehow slower than you expect a movie where the story moves this fast to be. And so you end up in this, I mean, it's cliche to say, but it's almost dreamlike, right? Like, things are moving along and you're constantly having ideas and things happen that mean things, but your body is physically sedated and there's a slowness to it at the same time. It's very, he seems like an exceptionally confident filmmaker. Yes. Well, I mean, this is, we're dealing with one of the greats. Like, I'm along far enough in my weird opinions about film. I'd probably put Cronenberg above Kubrick at this point as a filmmaker. I absolutely would too. I don't know why I was so reticent to say that. It just seemed so against common wisdom, or the common perception of it, or maybe it's just against what I would have said when I was 15. But well, you should probably stick with your 15-year-old ideas. Yeah, right. I'm first thought, best thought. That's what I learned from my mother. Yeah, I mean, the best album of all time is Burl Ives' "Watch the Donut, Not the Hole." That's probably true. Right? So, you learned that, you realized that on your own when you're 3 years old. You don't need to have more opinions after that. Yeah, you're done. Let's talk about Christine. Yeah. And shitters. This movie feels to me... Carpenter also one of the greats, for sure. Oh, yeah. And this movie feels to me like... you were saying earlier that a lot of these movies are people being like, okay, I guess I'll make this movie, and I feel like this must have been one of them, because I feel like the script they gave him for this movie is so terrible. If I remember correctly, this was his attempt
to make a studio film again after The Thing bombed so terrible.
Which, like, what a weird... Can you imagine The Thing not doing well? I don't know how that happened.
I mean, I can. It's a really bleak, like, small, weird feeling movie.
So good.
Being released into Reagan's America. Like,
yeah, okay, maybe. Oh, but it's like one of the best movies.
Oh, it's amazing. Don't take what I'm saying the wrong way. It's amazing.
I just have a hard time imagining people watching it and being like, nah. But I guess they just didn't watch it. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. It's definitely, it definitely feels like it was like going to be a studio movie, and someone wrote a script, and it's such a bad script.
Oh yeah.
But then everything he does on top of that terrible script is so good. It's interesting to watch because it's like the bones stayed bad. It's like a whole person where all of their bones are made out of bent coat hangers, but they're just so beautiful.
Yeah, and I feel like Carpenter and Cronenberg are both writers, but I do feel like I don't know what it's indicative of, but it's indicative of something that coming onto this job, I think Carpenter pretty much just took the script and shot it because he was not going to put himself into this. You know what I mean? Like after this, he'd go back to making more or less independent films for the rest of his career and be making the films he wanted to make. And this was his like, I'm going to take this as a studio job and earn my paycheck. And he just shot the script. Mm-hmm. Whereas Cronenberg, if I remember all my trivia correctly, did a lot of work on the script that he inherited when he took over the Dead Zone project. And I do feel like...
And that makes sense, because that project, as much as it's very Stephen King-y, also feels... When you watch it, you're like, this is a Cronenberg movie.
Yeah. And I think Cronenberg... this is not to point to one of them being a better filmmaker than the other, although I do have, I think, my preferences. Cronenberg, to me, it seems like is not a filmmaker who would take a movie without... I don't want to say without doing something on the script, but I don't think he would take a bad script and just shoot it without doing something to it. I still think he would do it. And Carpenter did. He just did it as a job, and, sometimes you got to do that. But it is something there about that.
But I think what's interesting about it, or what's the most interesting for me when I was watching it, is that it's clearly he was like, all right, these are the words on the page, let's go. But then every decision he made after that is like so deeply Carpenter.
Oh yeah,
and so aesthetically strong, and like the casting is super good, and all of the effects decisions, and the music is almost identical to Halloween 3. There's so much of what's going on is amazing, and it's funny that he was like, I'll just make this terrible script, but I'll use all of my flourishes. It still feels like his voice is there.
Yeah, he managed to infuse it with a tone. Like, it's a fun movie. For being a bad script, it's a really fun movie.
Oh, 100%.
And just the way he shoots the car, it doesn't feel like he's doing anything that special. And I'm sure, I'm blanking on the cinematographer for the movie. I'm sure that he had quite a lot to do with it, but it doesn't feel like they're doing anything particularly special, except that somehow the car looks more car than any other movie I can think of. Mm-hmm. Like, they were like, let's shoot this car, but more so.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Well, what do you make of my my Cronenberg Carpenter dichotomy? That I don't even really know what I mean by it, but just for some reason it's been nagging at me. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely feel the spirit of it. It doesn't feel wrong, for sure. I partially, it's like they're similar era and they're working in relatively similar genres, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they even ended up doing late night shows at the same time or something, like talking about new movies that they had coming out.
I believe that. And they both have such strong voices. I do think that I think you dipped into it a little bit when you were talking about Cronenberg's sort of story and pacing. He has sort of there's a confident sedateness, he has a very strong, everything is moving. There's a sense of fate kind of controlling everything in his movies, I think.
Yeah, very much so.
Things are just moving forward.
It's this ineluctable
and slowly
force
crushing down. Yeah. And Carpenter, I feel like, is dealing with really similar things, but it feels like his is more of a human-driven version of a similar conceit.
I think that's right, because all of Carpenter's films feel like work. And I don't mean that like they're a labor for me, but like it feels like people working. You're seeing people do things and move things along, and even the horror films where there's this strong sense of doom or fate, like, you know, Halloween, Prince of Darkness, where there's this overwhelming force moving things along. Visually it moves along the lines of people. It's all like he's very much like a Howard Hawksian action and dialogue director. Whereas I do agree that Cronenberg, somehow the people are in the film and the film is moving along. Whereas with Carpenter, the film doesn't move until the people move. Yeah,
exactly. Like even like Prince of Darkness, I think, is a great example, because there is that sort of the tube of goo devil, which may be the best devil in a movie, I think.
I'm hard pressed to think otherwise.
Yeah, but it's like the thing that's spurring everything along, and it's pushing. But all you're watching is people reacting to it, right? And on both sides, even you're watching the sort of the people in that church who are doing science, they're like falling apart and freaking out and reacting to things, and then also there's like the army of people led by Alice Cooper outside, who are pulled by. It's all about the people, even though the sort of antagonist is a tube of goo.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of why it's such a strong choice for him to make his devil just an abstract object, because he is all about watching Alice Cooper melt into bugs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, I think
they also have sort of opposite color palettes.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, Carpenter has this vividness to even his darkest shot movies, whereas as Cronenberg, you think of, you know, maybe it's just the Canadianness in him, but you definitely think of like the drabness of Toronto.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Even in his most visually inventive and crazy stuff, like even Videodrome has that scene on the harbor where everything's brown.
Oh man, yeah, everything is brown. And this, I mean, Dead Zone is exclusively brown.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Well, brown and like very faint blue at times.
Yeah. It's very pale. It's like a faded dish towel. There was a part in this movie where it was Christmas and there wasn't snow, and I was like, where is this movie set? Because it's not a normal Stephen King place or a normal Cronenberg place. And then Christopher Walken was like, Christmas, there should be snow. And I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Oh man, you did touch on it earlier, and we should bring it back to it before we close this out, because we're reaching our time. But god damn, young Christopher Walken, man.
Oh,
just one of those guys who had so much power.
Yes.
So much power, and he makes such consistently interesting choices. Mm-hmm. Such a strange view of experience. And then, you know, like Jack Nicholson and even at times our beloved Nick Cage, they turn in, you know, sort of parody performances because
that's what people are asking of them, right?
Yeah.
They're like, hey, could you make that Christopher Walken face? Could you say this like spooky Christopher Walken thing?
Yeah. No, I mean, it just...
But like in Dead Zone there's, you know, there are moments where he's supposed to be creepy or upset or whatever, where he's making faces where you could be like, haha, there's a Christopher Walken face. But for the whole first section of the movie, he's like smiling and sweet, and he's saying nice things in a kind voice.
Oh yeah.
It's like all things that no one let him do in the whole second half of his career.
Yeah, no, he has such range, but even within doing like normal, you know, within performing normalcy, he still has all of these, not spook show, not like, oh, he's such a weird guy, but just genuinely strange the way, like, individual people can be genuinely strange.
Yes.
Like he's making real choices that push his performance into some other space that isn't just standard movie acting. And it's such a shame that, you know, these guys, whatever, he's living a great life. I'm sure he's having a great time. But
sure.
I dream of a world in
such
which
a strong career.
Yeah, I dream of a world in which this isn't the best film he was ever in. You know, this isn't the best Christopher Walken performance. That there were a dozen other films that used him to the degree that a film like this can use him. And look, I love a good, like, goofy-ass Walken performance. I love Batman Returns. I love Pulp Fiction.
Of course.
Whatever, you know, all that stuff. I don't love Pulp Fiction, but I love him in Pulp Fiction. But, it was the Deer Hunter and then this, and I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting, but can you think of a better Walken performance in this movie?
There aren't any that I know for sure of. There are some movies he was in around the same time that I haven't watched. That, like, I've never seen A View to a Kill.
Well,
is he amazing in that?
Here's the thing. He, like, immediately... that he's already almost in self-parody mode at that point.
Yeah, okay. That's
like, and that's not... Was it the same year or, like, a year later or something?
Yeah, probably.
It's
around then.
He's completely... Yeah. That's when people like that start realizing, like, well, nobody can tell the difference between me really doing it and me doing a bit, so I'll just do a bit. Yeah. It's like that story I've told a million times, this story I love about Brando, where Brando, supposedly, whenever he was working with a new director, would do 2 different takes. One where he was indicating and one where he was really acting, and he'd wait to see which take the director printed. And if he could tell the right one, then he'd actually turn in a performance. And if not, he'd be like, well, I'm not gonna, open my veins if you can't tell the difference.
What a dick.
Oh yeah, totally, right?
What if he just wasn't as good a performer as he thinks he was, and he just did the same thing twice?
Very possible. No, I think at least early in his career, he was... I think that he was feeling the genuine pain of... Yeah. That genuine pain of being the person who's doing so much more work than the people around you, or is feeling things so much... Not more work, because everybody's working hard on a movie. I don't mean that they're not, laboring, but that you you have a heightened awareness and a heightened, emotional sense of things that people aren't matching. People aren't meeting you where you are, and it's too hard to do it if you're not gonna... If you can't trust that people will pick it up and run with you. For sure. But we didn't even talk about shitters.
But, oh, you're right, I'm sorry. Tell me about shitters, Jason.
No. It's just that goofy-ass Stephen King slang. If you read enough Stephen King, you get this. One of his tics is he just comes up with these dopey-ass slang phrases that maybe he heard as a kid in Maine, but I don't think so.
Like, definitely not.
And he just kind of comes up like, no shitters ever getting between me and Christine.
Yeah.
That's pure King. That line is one of the most accurate adaptations of Stephen King I've ever heard. Whether that line's in the book or not, I just assume it is.
It's still correct to him.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I don't think we've really have dived into this, but so far I think I've been generally I think I've generally liked the names he puts on characters. They're not like I tend to, when I'm writing people, I'm like, his name is Shed, which to me is better than being like, his name is
Johnny Smith.
I can't. Yeah, exactly. But he has something sort of in between where he's like landing on these like his name is Lonnie Donegan. They're all like a little distinctive,
Bill Williams,
but you're like, oh, that's a name, I guess. Will Williams seems too silly. But like the main character in this one is what, like Arnie Renderson or something
like
and you're
that.
Like, oh, that's like
no, it's just that
you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely a dude who I went to high school with.
Of course, the dead zone is Johnny Smith.
Right. Oh, really? Is that where you came up with that? Yeah.
That's
funny. Well, okay, so that's a bad one. But for the most part, I feel like...
Well, but it also, when you do something so well, then you make that choice. It's
true. It's true.
It becomes meaningful. Johnny Smith ain't no shitter.
That's a fact. Nor would he ever say shitter. He comes from a different tradition. Johnny Smith is definitely out of a different tradition than the Stephen King like band of boys.
Yeah, at least in the film. The book. I know there's a lot taken out of the. It's a long book, and in the book there's like a whole parallel structure. I looked at it enough to know this. Like every other chapter is the what's his name, Martin Sheen, the politician.
Oh, interesting.
So it tracks Johnny and the politician as like parallel development all the way through their lives. And so like it's this thing where they're becoming closer and closer intertwined, by the end of the book, which, Cronenberg just jettisoned because there's no space for that in the film.
They're also, I mean, I don't know, I haven't read it, but jettisoning that seems correct because that makes it a story about two people who are like fatally intertwined. And this version of it makes it a story about a man who comes into his own as a psychic and then has a crisis of conscience.
Oh, yeah. I like it much better in theory. Again, I haven't read the book.
Yeah. I do. This is a thing to maybe touch on a little bit before we dip out, is that Christine doesn't go fully into the, like, band of boys, but that is a thing. I know enough about Stephen King to know that we're going to run into that a ton, where it's like, here's 6 15-year-olds
fucking each other,
saying dumb stuff. Yeah. And this one, it doesn't obviously go fully into that because it's like 2 best friends. But there's like that mob of bullies. It definitely falls into that dumb high school movie thing where like no one knows what bullying is actually like.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Where it's just like a big guy with a knife who wants to murder that kid for absolutely no reason. You're like, that's never happened.
Oh yeah, it's like, we're not going to do Stand By Me because it's not a horror film, but the Kiefer Sutherland character in that movie.
I haven't actually seen.
Oh, you haven't seen Stand By Me? It's pretty great. And Kiefer Sutherland plays that knife-wielding, psychotic, not quite teenage bully. Like, it's very Stephen King.
But it is. I think that's going to be a thing we're going to run into, even if we're not doing Stand By Me.
Stephen King's Band of Brothers.
A few times. Yeah.
And I just want to be clear that I wasn't just making a random child sex joke when I said a group of guys fucking each other. Pretty sure that's how it ends.
Oh, great.
The book.
Good. I'm excited to see that.
I don't know what they do.
Not in a weird way. I'm not, like, excited to watch.
I don't know what they're going to do in the new movie. I think that's but I'm pretty sure the novel notoriously ends with an underage gangbang. So
that sounds genuinely upsetting.
I should probably fact check that before I put it out into the ether. Well,
guys, you know what Stephen King is really into?
Test Split Tooth's libel insurance.
Their journalistic ethics.
All right. Well, this is I think the end of our smooth ride, Jim. I mean, we had a little Cujo-shaped bump.
You keep thinking that. You keep thinking it, but I think Cujo's the only bad one.
No, we'll see. This is certainly the end of the classics.
Sure.
We've made it through all of the ones that if you were to sit me down a month ago and say, what are the good Stephen King movies? I've almost run through the entire list, and I've definitely run through the list of genuine classics.
I don't know why you keep omitting Lawnmower Man, but we'll talk about that when we get to it.
Because it's not based on Stephen King.
You say that.
We'll talk about it when we get there. All right. All right. Day 5 is a setting sun, and day 6 has yet to begun, and we're moving on down the line. Oh, God.
I'm going to go to sleep until we record our next episode.
Me too. Good night, buddy.
Good night.
Sleep well.
Not while you're doing that.
Hell to the King is a special presentation of the Cinesthesia podcast, produced by Iguanodonald Studios, and distributed by Split Tooth Media. Music by Loyalty Freak, and by Jim Harmony and his Melody Machines. Hell to the King is recorded live before a studio audience in the future and then sent back to your time by attaching the audio to their memories. The recordings are harvested by engineers in the past at various points during the childhoods of the audience members. The harvesting process is imperfect, extra material is often harvested. All episodes may contain some portion of human soul. Do not shake. Not microwave safe. Discard 7 days after opening.
His name is Shed.
Cinesthesia.